I'm Karen Storwick. I'm the Vice Chair of the Royal Alberta United Services Institute and the Director of Communications. And welcome to Rousey. If you haven't joined us before, we are a think tank based out of Calgary. And we present dynamic speakers 6 or 7 times a year. Tonight, we have an incredible speaker. I can't wait to hear. Quentin, I'll turn over to you.
All right. Good evening, everybody. As advertised, I'm Quentin Innes. I'm the moderator for tonight. Good to see all your faces again, and it's good to see such a great turnout. I think we're going to have a really interesting evening. So I'm going to introduce Richard Martin. He's the founder and president of Alcera Consulting, a strategic advisory firm specializing in helping organizations navigate uncertainty, exploit change, and seize opportunities while mitigating risks to ensure growth and success. He's recognized for his expertise in strategic leadership, project management, and organizational development, and is the author of Brilliant Maneuvers, How to Use Military Wisdom to Win Business Battles, as well as a creator of the website and blog entitled exploitingchange.com. And I would advise you to check out Exploiting Change. There's some very, very interesting articles on it. Richard's consulting engagements span a wide range of sectors, including work with the Department of National Defence, Environment Canada, Commissionaires, CGI Global Wealth and Capital Markets, Empire Life, and the Ottawa Police Service. He has collaborated with the Stephen Gaffney Company to interview executives of the Nuclear National Security Administration, Los Alamos National Laboratory, Amazon Web Services, and CGI Federal in the United States. His international expertise extends to training managers from companies and organizations in Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and other countries in the Middle East and Africa. Richard focuses on 3 core areas: strategic action, navigating uncertainty, and transformative change. He is a former infantry officer in the Canadian Army with over 20 years of service. He served in leadership and staff positions in Bosnia, Africa, Europe, and the Persian Gulf. He holds a master's degree in project management from Université de Québec en Outaouais, where he also lectures on project management, leadership, and strategy. His work continues to have a significant impact across both the public and the private sectors. So with that said, I will hand over to Richard.
Thank you very much, Quentin. At one point there, I wasn't sure you were talking about me, but I'll take it. So thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. And this is a unique opportunity for me to bounce ideas off some brilliant people with a lot of experience, many of you in areas that I don't have experience in, but it'll be interesting to have that exchange. So I titled, I'm just going to share my screen here. And I got some slides because for a number of reasons, but mainly just to, so you don't have to necessarily just look at my face, but also so that we can, there's some graphical information that might help in seizing or understanding some of the concepts. And I think it'd be interesting. It'll keep it interesting for those purposes. So I've titled this presentation Worldview Warfare. So how worldviews shape perceptions of history and identity, and also what that has as an effect on strategy. So basically, where this came from was, it all started back with, although I didn't realize it at the time, but the sort of like the earthquake that was COVID-19. And what really struck me about COVID-19 was that some people were freaking out and some people were going, yeah, we'll deal with it. And so although more people were freaking out than were, let's say, sanguine or less emotional about the thing, but we could see that there were different views of how this should be dealt with and what the importance of that was. And then, of course, we ended up 2 years ago, or now 3 years ago in 2022, at about this time of the year with the truckers' protest, where we could really see, I mean, regardless of what you think of either the government's policies or the ideas behind the truckers' protest, you could see that if you start playing around with people's livelihood, they don't take it well. So somebody was talking, I think it was Quentin was talking in the intro before we started about Tony Soprano. Well, you know, if you prevent people from earning a living and you have overly restrictive regulations, they tend not to like that, especially after 2 years of lockdown. So I could see that there was something going on, and it was really at a level, at a high level or a deep level philosophically, where some people were saying, you know, this is a limit. We're reaching the limits of government overreach, or of how much the government should be controlling our lives. And like I said, I'm not trying to go down a rabbit hole with that discussion, but that was one of the impetuses. And then we, of course, at about the same time, we had the Russian large-scale attempt to take over Ukraine in what was effectively an attempt at a coup de main. You know, Sean Maloney and I have discussed this on several occasions, where it's almost as if they were trying to do another Hungary 1956 or Czechoslovakia 1968, but didn't have the wherewithal to carry it through. And of course, with everything that's occurred since then, and we could see that there's really two worldviews. There's sort of like the Russian worldview of, you know, this is within the Russian sphere of influence. We're allowed to do whatever we want within our sphere of influence. And then there's the Western world and liberal democracy saying, no, we have to support Ukraine, and we should support Ukraine. But at the same time, there were people in the West saying, no, 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 we shouldn't, because it could cause World War III or whatever. So there was obviously something, we were touching very deep nerves there. And then, of course, the 7th of October, 2023 occurred with the Hamas massacres and kidnappings. And then over the last year, where we've seen really there are major differences in worldview between some individuals, or maybe there's a majority worldview, and then there are more of a minority worldview. But this was affecting how people were seeing things, their perspective, who the friends were, who the enemies were. And this was affecting even strategic decision making. So I came up with this concept of worldview warfare, which I view as a descriptive framework only. It's not prescriptive. It's not saying you should do this, or this is how to win a war or whatever against a very entrenched opponent. It's a way, I see it as a way to analyze strategic situations from almost like from first principles. How do people see the world? They're seeing things differently than us. What does this lead to? How does this affect our decision-making, our planning, and their decision-making and planning and strategizing? So I see this as an exploration. This is not an academic presentation or paper or anything. So during the Q&A, I'll be interested in getting your feedback and seeing what you think. So that's sort of where it comes from, worldview warfare. And as I was doing that, I started developing a concept of what I call strategic epistemology. So epistemology is one of the four main branches of philosophy that studies and considers how we know things, how we view the world. And that's where the term worldview comes from. I mean, it's originally a German concept, Weltanschauung, and where the way you see things gives you a distorting lens, if we could put it that way, and creates biases. So what I'd like to do today is to present this concept of strategic epistemology and worldview warfare, and then view it. So we'll look at the basics as I see it, and then try and analyze it using a case study of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, especially as it's played out over the last year. And one of the things that I realized over the last year as I delved more and more into it is that not only are we not thinking the same way or coming from different points of view, we're not even on the same planet. But the Israelis and the Palestinians are not on the same planet. So we'll look at strategic epistemology, worldviews. We'll also look at how central the whole concept of land and territory is, because it's central also to the concept of state building and nation building. And then what this implies in terms of action and strategy. So I start, of course, with the obligatory quote by Clausewitz and Sun Tzu, but the important point here is Clausewitz, at the beginning of On War, he says, the first and most critical task or act of judgment that the statesman and commander can make is to decide what kind of war we're in, okay? What kind of enemy we're facing and what kind of war or conflict comes out of that. And that's the most important thing. And as we'll see in the Israel-Palestinian conflict or Arab-Israeli conflict, is the two parties are not fighting over the same thing. They're not aiming at the same objectives. They're not seeing the world the same way. And that is having a major impact. And we're seeing it right now with this new supposed hostage deal, that they're viewing this in completely different ways. And from the standpoint of Hamas, this is a victory. So this is where we're coming from in terms of strategic epistemology and worldview warfare. So I put forward a thesis or a hypothesis that the most intractable conflicts arise from fundamentally opposing worldviews. And our worldviews shape our perceptions of history, identity, but also they shape our strategic objectives. What it is that we think, that we believe, what we value, and how we think we should act, and in what way we should act. So strategic epistemology is how knowledge and beliefs about the nature of reality and society guide and frame our strategy and our strategic decisions. And worldview warfare is one result of that, or one lens through which we can look at that, where we're looking at the formulation or the forming of meaning and the interpretation of events and actions based on cultural, religious, and ideological differences in worldview. So once again, it's a descriptive, not a normative or prescriptive approach. I'm not trying to come up with the ideal strategy for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or any other conflict for that matter, because quite frankly, you know, a lot more smarter people have been trying to deal with this over the last 75 years, and it's not Richard Martin on a Wednesday night in 2025 who's going to come up with the perfect solution. So yeah, and one of the things that's really important here to consider is that is the notion of narrative, and that there's a narrative driving both sides in that conflict, but there's a narrative driving all worldviews, okay, and all strategic decision-making, beliefs, and values. So for instance, if we're talking about the Ukraine and Russia conflict, there are different narratives driving that or encapsulating those worldviews. And they can provide a lot of information when we analyze them to see what it is that people are thinking, why they think that way, and why they think these things are important to them, and why they're willing to fight and die for them. That's another important. So it's the same for China with Taiwan, where China believes that Taiwan should be part of China. And we could take any number of conflicts. I hesitate to use the example of what Trump's mouthing off in the last few months and weeks, but that shows there's a worldview there. There is an idea behind that. There's a narrative. And one of the problems we in Canada are facing right now is, what's our narrative? What is our worldview? And our prime minister went on CNN or something the other day and said, you know, Canadians are proud of not being American. Well, I think a lot of people are saying, well, that's not a very good narrative for a country, a sovereign nation. So not all conflict is at the level of worldviews, and this is important to note. So for instance, I think Israel-Palestine, Ukraine, Russia, these are worldview level conflicts. Why? Because they're seeing the world differently, and in some senses, they're fighting for different things. They have completely different objectives. But there are, so historically, I think there have been other worldviews, worldview warfare, situations, like I think maybe the Crusades, the 30 Years' War, the wars of religion in Europe, the Napoleonic Wars, the American Civil War was about a vision, differing visions of what the United States would be. Of course, the Russian Revolution and then Civil War, World War II, the Chinese Civil War, the Cold War was a worldview war, but it was a Cold War. So yeah, there were a lot of flashpoints. There were a lot of threats, counter threats, signaling, etc. That's one of the things that Sean Maloney has explored in great depth in his work. But it was still basically a worldview, a situation of very different clashing worldviews. But there have also been non-worldview warfare situations. So for instance, I'm thinking maybe the 100 Years' War, the dynastic wars of the 18th century. Even the title of the war says it all, like the War of Spanish Succession, the War of the Austrian Succession, the wars of state consolidation, how Prussia built its kingdom and then took over Germany. These were, in many ways, the belligerents were operating within the same worldview. It was just a question, who gets to own this piece of land and to tax the peasants and the serfs. So the 7 Years' War, Mexican War, et cetera, Sino-Japanese War, I throw that out there, the Russo-Japanese War, possibly the First World War, although I think that could be open for interpretation. So the way I see this is worldview is the most encompassing level or aspect of epistemology. Within that, you have sets of beliefs, and the beliefs lead to certain values, which bring us to identify certain ends, and then we identify certain ways to achieve those ends and the means to achieve those ends. So the worldview is the foundational framework, dictates how we perceive reality, history, and identity. So it tells us what's true and what's our place in the world as a society, as an individual, as a group, a tribe, whatever. And the beliefs are derived from worldviews. And then these allow us to form normative judgments. And from there, we formulate ends. We say, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve. These are our objectives. And then you have the normal ends means relationship. And ideology within all this is a way to articulate this whole package in a relatively formal articulation or expression of this package of worldview, beliefs, etc. So, I could go through a lot of examples here, but we can always come back to them in the Q&A if you want. But at this stage, I just want to move on to a very practical application. So there's a logical flow that goes top to bottom and then bottom to top. So as an example here, I just took, why does Canada support Ukraine? Where does that come from? So if we go from worldview all the way to the means, so from top to bottom, so Canada believes, views the world as governed by a liberal international order, where democracy, sovereignty, and collective security are fundamental. So we emphasize that international law should be upheld, and we have to resist aggression by authoritarian states, or at least authoritarian states which we feel directly threaten us or our allies. And from this, we generate beliefs, for instance, that allowing Russian aggression to go unchecked undermines the rules-based international order, and that aiding Ukraine strengthens the global democratic alliances and the resilience and helps to deter future aggressors. And this is, when you listen to the language of our politicians, of our leaders, of in the public fora, various public fora, that's what people are talking about. Now, in terms of values, Canada values sovereignty, freedom, and human rights, and it aligns with its support for Ukraine as a democratic nation under direct threat or attack. And we view stability in Eastern Europe and Europe in general and resistance to Russian aggression as critical to global peace and security, especially of our. So from there, we formulated aims to achieve a secure, sovereign Ukraine, or at least contribute to that, so that it can resist Russian aggression. And the broader goal is to reinforce the credibility and authority of the rules-based international system. And then we formulate certain ways of achieving that: military training through Operation Unifier, lethal aid, humanitarian assistance, economic assistance, imposing economic sanctions on Russia, etc. And then the means flow from that, either material means, financial means, military means, and also diplomatic actions internationally. And then you go from bottom to top, so which closes the loop. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but here on the left, you go from liberal international order implies a belief in rules-based stability, which implies the value of sovereignty, which implies the goal of supporting Ukrainian defense and resilience, which implies a strategy of military aid and sanctions, which means we deploy resources and support Ukraine directly. And then from means to worldview, we provide aid and sanctions, which is meant to strengthen Ukraine, which is meant to reinforce our commitment to our values of sovereignty and democracy, which upholds our belief in collective security and reaffirms our worldview of a stable international order. Now, whether this is right or wrong, I think is secondary at this stage. This is why I say this is the descriptive, not prescriptive or normative. So if we take the Israel-Palestinian conflict, it's all based around basically the right of return. So there's an excellent book that came out, I think, in 2020, which is extremely well documented, The War of Return by Einat Wilf and Adi Schwartz. So Einat Wilf was a left-wing politician in Israel, and Adi Schwartz is a journalist. And they had this epiphany that, wait a second, we're working on different assumptions than the Palestinians are, and certainly the Palestinian hardliners. So the Palestinian conception of themselves as refugees from Palestine and their demand to exercise what they call a right of return reflects the Palestinians' most profound beliefs about their relationship with the land and their willingness or lack thereof to share any part of it with the Jews. And their demand to return to what became the sovereign state of Israel in 1948 is a testament to the Palestinian rejection of the legitimacy of a state for the Jews in any part of their ancestral homeland. So think of that for a second. When we're talking about, we're going to trade hostages, we're going to train land for peace and all this kind of stuff, that might have worked with Egypt and Jordan and the Abraham Accords, but is it going to work with the Palestinians? So what are the historic roots of these worldviews? So on the left, we've got Zionism, and on the right, what I call anti-Zionism. But instructively, there's another book that's very interesting by Daniel Pipes, which is called Israel Victory. But he calls anti-Zionism, he refers to it as Arab Zionism. In other words, the Arabs didn't want Palestine until the Jews wanted it. Basically, that's his argument. So where does Zionism come from? Well, it's based on Palestine as the pre-Roman land of Israel, yet it's Israel. I say which one because obviously how far back in history you want to go. And you know, if you start delving into this, you know, like how long has it been Palestine and how long have there been Jews and all this? It never ends. Zionism was basically social democratic. And it went from a proto-state to a weak state to a strong state. And based on autonomy and self-help, so the Jewish Agency, the Jewish Fund, the World Zionist Organization, and they started buying land, purchasing land from absentee landowners, and therefore going from a system of a traditional common land management and ownership, collective land management and ownership, to a freehold system where land is a resource. And they started basically a kind of collectivist agro-capitalism through kibbutzim and moshavim. So that's where the Israeli conciliation worldview comes from. So Zionism is basically a conciliation worldview. We can all be happy. We can live on the land. We can share the land. We can have our separate states. Let's negotiate on that basis, and everything will be great. And according to Daniel Pipes, he calls it, within the conciliation mindset, he says the two main strategies have been enrichment and placation. So try to enrich the Palestinians and try to placate them, but manifestly it's not working. And then in anti-Zionism, that's basically Palestine is part of Greater Syria, or whatever they, Al-Sham, whatever they decide to call it, or the Southern Levant, or Jund Filastin, which was the name of the region of Greater Palestine within the first caliphates. But ultimately, it's all part of Dar al-Islam. And this is normally translated as House of Islam. But the opposite of Dar al-Islam is Dar al-Harb, which means the house of war. So there's a bit of linguistic subterfuge going on here when it's translated as the house of Islam and the house of war. Well, Islam means submission or subjugation. In other words, if you're a Muslim, you're okay. But if you're a Jew or a Christian or anybody else, you have to submit to the majority Arab Muslim population and the rulers. So that's how they view the entire region. It's part of Islam. It's the region of submission that we have conquered, and you're subordinate to us. And the Jews coming in and trying to set up their own state, well, that's, from their perspective, that's an injustice. And it's based on persistent tribal and patriarchal governance, which in large measure persists, and an Arab protectorate. One of the things that's really striking when you go back in history is how passive the Palestinians were, or the Arabs living there, the peasants, the Fedayeen. It was like, do something for us, protect us. Whereas the Jews, the Zionists, settlers, had a very can-do attitude that you can criticize either side, but that was the reality, and it remains there. So communal land management, absentee landowners, and that becomes the Palestinian rejectionist worldview. So obviously, land and territory are foundational to the conflict. And from the Israeli / Zionist / Jewish standpoint, this is the ancient homeland of the Jews. And we've heard this persistently over the last 15 months. Oh, well, the Jews are the indigenous people of Palestine, of the land of Israel. Okay, how far back do you want to go to determine who's indigenous? Are we going to go back to the first settlements 10,000 years ago after the last ice age? I mean, we can get ridiculous with this. Conversely, the Palestinians, many Palestinians, like there's a book, 3,000 Years of Palestinian History, where basically they're trying to prove that they've always been Palestinians and they've always existed there. Well, that can go on and on. The point being is they had different conceptions of sovereignty and different conceptions of who should own that land and who should control it. So basically, this is what it boils down to. This is the rejectionist / Palestinian view, and we're seeing it right now. I was just looking at X a few minutes before we came on, and people are celebrating in Gaza this so-called peace agreement or hostage release agreement, and they're going around the Hamas people around the Middle East and especially in Gaza and the West Bank. Well, we're still going to go and conquer Palestine from the river to the sea. We're going to liberate Jerusalem and we're going to kill all the Jews. So have they learned anything? Probably not. So once again, we're seeing this is how they see it. When we hear from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, this isn't a negotiating position. This is their goal. So that frames the strategic framework, the strategic objectives, or should, for the Israelis, for the Americans, for the entire international community, for Canada's stand, okay, with respect to the Israel-Palestine conflict. So, of course, we've all heard about the Oslo Accords, 1993, how the West Bank and Gaza were supposed to be the Palestinian state. This was supposed to be the Palestinian state. This is what's left of what was going to be the Arab state from the partition agreement in 1947, most of which was lost in the War of Independence. And then Israel conquered the West Bank and the Gaza Strip during the 1967 Six-Day War. So this was supposed to be the basis for peace in the Middle East. Okay, this was 30 years ago. And we all remember Yasser Arafat. Yes, I renounce war. We renounce the, we recognize Israel's right to exist, etc. But there are quotes. We plan to eliminate the state of Israel and establish a purely Palestinian state. Okay, same thing with Mahmoud Abbas and the PA. They still don't recognize the existence of Israel. They don't recognize the right of Jews to have a nation, a state in the Middle East, and they will do everything that they think they need to do in order to reconquer and return Palestine to Arab/Islamic dominance. So this basically summarizes the conciliation and rejectionist strategies in terms of land. So from the conciliation standpoint, you can have peaceful coexistence through equitable partition, using diplomatic negotiations, territorial concessions, and collaboration. And that means, in practice, withdrawal from contested areas. So originally it was Sinai, which led to the peace with Egypt in the late 70s. And then the various withdrawals, and then going back into Gaza. And now it looks like they're going to withdraw from the Netzarim corridor and things like that, in order to secure the release of these hostages. And who knows what's going to happen after that. On the rejectionist side, the Palestinian side, their goal is simple: eliminate or transform Israel into a non-Jewish state where Arab Muslims are predominant. And they're willing to do it through armed struggle, propaganda, demographic strategies, i.e. the continuing UNRWA. Everybody has seen how UNRWA is completely a tool of the Palestinian Authority and various Palestinian groups. So it's completely beholden to the Palestinian rejectionist position. And the idea that there are still, whatever it is, 5 or 6 million Palestinian refugees is complete anomaly. And Einat Wilf and Adi Schwartz explain that in their book, The War of Return. So resistance, illegal building, and leveraging international sympathy. These are, and we've seen this. This is what the campus protests, the sit-ins, the massive displays of anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, burning synagogues all through the Western world, and certainly in Canada. And this is, should be a wake-up call for us all. So territory is the basis of statehood. So I've got this model here, I call it the strategic tetrahedron, but in order to have a state, you have to have territory. So this is what the vision of the Palestinian rejectionists is. It's territory. And from what I can see, it's the majority of the population, of the Palestinian population, certainly in the West Bank and Gaza. So we can come back to this when we get to the Q&A, but this is a model I've developed to show the different types of states, or, from non-state to pre-state, quasi-state, proto-state, failed state, weak state, and strong state. So right now the Palestinian Authority is somewhere between a quasi-state and a proto-state. And when you get the materials afterwards, you can look at this. But the point here is that they're not really able to govern effectively the territory and to guarantee anything on behalf of Palestinian people. And Israel, of course, is in the position of being a strong state, even though there are a lot of disagreements, etc. They are a strong state. So I'm not going to go through this. You can look at it at your leisure. But basically, I go through, once again, all of these, the levels from worldview to means for the conciliation, i.e. the majority Israeli position, and the rejection, which seems to be the near universal Palestinian position. And what it basically boils down to is, once again, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. It should be Arab-dominated, Arab territory, Arab state, predominantly Muslim, where any Jews and Christians living there are dhimmis. That is, they are in a subordinate status, as it should be from their perspective in an Arab Muslim country. So the beliefs that go with that, the values, and the specific strategy. So this is just another way to present the information I've been discussing. And the Palestinians' rejection strategy. So basically, when you get to this point, so Israel's conciliation strategy, when you get into the means and the ways and means of trying to achieve a lasting peace through coexistence, recognition, and equitable resolution of disputes, a willingness to trade land for peace, to have a two-state solution. So Israel's goal is purely defensive, and the aim is to continue existing in security. The Palestinians' goal, as instantiated and represented by the PA, Hamas, and other groupings, but primarily those two, and they're at loggerheads, they're at each other's throats too, so that's another thing. But they, from their perspective, their goal is replace Israel with a Palestinian state. So it's like the old saying, when they tell you what they are, who they are, believe them. Okay, so this is what Israel has to deal with. This is what the international community has to deal with. So when Canada continues supporting the Palestinians, this is what we're supporting. Okay, regardless of what you may think of that or not. And the Israeli approach of periodically going, especially into Gaza, to mow the grass, as they say, and it has not been effective, because every time they pull back out, they buy a bit of time, Hamas reconstitutes, starts launching rockets and raids and murdering and killing people, etc. It starts again. So the Israeli means, the Israeli ends, ways, and means work for a state organization, but they don't work for this kind of an organization where you're dealing with an entire population and these subversive groups who want to take over your land. So can worldviews change? Daniel Pipes, in his book, Israel Victory, he proposes a primarily psychological or cognitive strategy to get the Palestinians to renounce their worldview of rejection, embrace some form of worldview of conciliation. And he sees signs of hope in various surveys and things like that. After what we've seen today, I doubt that that's a realistic thing. So Germany and Japan afterward too had radical changes in worldviews and changes of heart. We could almost say like it was a national conversion experience. But certainly Germany, they were completely destroyed. I mean, they had nothing left. So what were they going to do? Hamas and the PA constantly have allies outside of that region, Arab allies, Muslim allies, and also left-wing allies in all kinds of states around the world, within the European Union, within various parties in Canada, the United States, etc. So I'm not sure how applicable that model is. And so food for thought. Maybe there's time for a different approach, maybe a counterinsurgency approach. I'm not an expert in that, but with some of you have been to Afghanistan or have maybe studied various conflicts, maybe there's something that could be done along those lines. And can this framework of worldview warfare be operationalized for our strategic planning in Canada? So that before we go into, say, Afghanistan or any other region in the world, we do so having assessed the worldviews, having assessed how realistic our goals are before going in, and being very clear of what it is that we're trying to achieve. And how realistic would it be to change an entire society, make them democratic, or make them more Western, when they're completely under the control and within their traditional mindset, whether it be tribalism or whatever. And does it apply to other conflicts, or intractable or otherwise? So I might have gone a bit, maybe 5 minutes overtime, 35 minutes or so, but hopefully that gives you a good overview. And I'll entertain any comments or questions. I'll hand the floor back to you, Q.
Richard, that's excellent. I like the idea of opposing worldviews, and I like the idea of starting with those as a kind of a first principles argument, because I've always argued that you have to understand your enemy, your adversary. And I just stuck up a quote there from Ian Hope from 2006, understand the war you're in. That was his advice after the first summer in Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a couple of lots of interest here. I'm going to start with Joe Howard. So I'll pass it over to you, and then continue with Frederick Moret. So Joe, over to you.
Thanks, Quentin. Richard, outstanding. I'd like to challenge your comment that your model is principally descriptive. After you've laid on 35 minutes of great prose, it's far more than just prescriptive. It leads into diagnostic analysis. And from diagnostic analysis, you've led us into prescriptive analysis. And after that, we can start to engage in predictive analysis. I think you've undersold your model. I think it touches all four, and I think it's a great model. It's far more than just descriptive. Any comments?
Well, thanks for that. My point in saying it's descriptive is I'm trying to be scientific in describing so that we can go in as objectively as possible. Of course, absolute objectivity is impossible, but why I think it's important to say it's a descriptive model first is before you start deciding on solutions, it's important to understand. And Quentin just quoted Ian Hope about understand the war you're in. He's quoting basically, or he's saying exactly the same thing that Clausewitz said. So he's in great company. And I just raised this, I'm not criticizing or anything, but did Canada understand what we were getting into when we went into Afghanistan? Did we understand what we were getting into when we sent troops to fight ISIS? Okay, and personally, I still don't know that much about what happened with that. When we've got these ideas about what we were doing during the Cold War with peacekeeping, like Sean Maloney has a whole book about this, Canada and UN peacekeeping in the first part of the Cold War until 1970. What was the point of peacekeeping? It fit within a strategic framework that was linked to beliefs and values and a worldview and very specific perspectives. So I'm aware of what you're saying. I want to eventually get to that. And I'm aware that I was actually getting into diagnostics and things like that. But if you go to see your doctor and you say, doc, I got a sore knee, he's going to base it on his knowledge of medicine, physiology, etc. He's going to ask you questions. Then he's going to say, I think you have you have whatever, a torn rotator cuff. I don't even know if that's in the knee. No, the rotator cuff's in the elbow. So whatever. But the point is that then he diagnoses. Now, what you do after that is another matter. But I take your point. It's valid. I'm not trying to undersell the model. I'm just trying to place it as a descriptive model for exploratory purposes and discussion purposes at this stage. But I do intend to take it further. So thanks for that, Joe. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Joe, it's a great question. And I think I agree. I think there's a lot in this. But I also take Richard's point that you've got to understand where you are. So if you look at the changes as 3 steps model, where are we? Where do we want to be? And how do we get there? I think what you're doing right now is defining where we are. Fred, I'm going to turn over to you. You got a question in there about Trump. And I think what you're asking really is there a divergence in worldview coming?
Well, exactly. The geopolitical situation, is not getting any better day by day. We've had a number of folks in Canada and across the Western world giving a timeline of approximately 5-ish years, 5 to 7 years before something really bad happens, say in Europe, with NATO and Russia. But if we apply, I look at what Trump is doing as far as his comments on the Panama Canal, on Greenland, on Canada. That is very reminiscent of 19th century US imperialism, the 1823 Monroe Doctrine, Manifest Destiny. It seems to be a return to that particular worldview. That's what allowed Alaska to be purchased from Russia, the Louisiana Purchase, Cuban Missile Crisis. I'd say even so much as the CIA coup in Chile, right? Things like that are all around sort of manifest destiny and America's control over the Americas. But if we apply that, say, to nuclear deterrence, this realpolitik that is coming back with this multipolar world with President Xi, focusing on traditional Chinese, imperial ambitions, Russian traditional imperial ambitions. Putin refers to Catherine the Great and Peter the Great, in his comments. So we've had a collapse of most, if not all, I think, of all the nuclear arms control agreements that marked the last 60, 70 years, which prevented something really bad from happening. We're seeing a significant focus in the last 10 or 15 years across the US, NATO countries, Russia, China, in getting away from strategic nuclear weapons, more into the tactical realm, because low yield causes less damage, therefore it's more acceptable as use. And I was reading this week, there was a polling coming out of Russia whereby 39% of the Russian population now sees nuclear use as acceptable in some resolution to the Ukraine conflict. So does Trump's worldview and his approach, how do you think that is going to have an impact on that particular aspect?
Well, one of the big problems with Trump is, what the hell is he? Where's the line? I mean, it's hard to tell. But a couple of weeks ago, when this all started, we're going to annex Canada and everything, in Greenland, and people were talking about that, and to me, it's just like it's the Monroe Doctrine again. The difference is, it seems to me that during the Cold War, I don't know why, maybe it was the experience of the Second World War, and maybe it was because there was a lot more experience at the top, very experienced people making decisions and things like that. I think that it was still the same worldview. It was still the same beliefs and values. It was done, and even the same ends, but it was done in a much more subtle way. So when you look at how the Americans during the Second World War basically took over Iceland for obvious reasons, and then and somebody might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but even at that point, they started getting involved in Greenland. And then when the Cold War started, they basically set up a base, Thule, Greenland. I remember when I was a kid, my father went to Alert, and they landed at Thule, Greenland, which I guess at one point was considered a secret base or something. And when you read about Sean Maloney's book, Emergency War Plan, how they had planes flying over the Great White North, the Pole, flying into and out of northern Canada, the B-47 bombers, the B-36s or whatever, B-52s, air-to-air refueling, bases in Greenland, bases in Alaska. So a lot of the same things were going on. It's just it was presented or packaged differently. So that's why I think that, yeah, we're seeing a more unrefined version of what's always been there. You know, I mean, we all remember like, oh, softwood lumber again. Okay. You know, I mean, we're you know, it's a situation. I don't know. Is it really a change in worldview? I don't know. It's certainly more belligerent. And I would have to actually, you know, think some more about it and actually start delving into it. But, you know, there are people with a higher pay grade than me who should be thinking about this, and I would hope that they are. But certainly Trump's approach seems to be sow chaos and see what happens so that I can, you know, get something out of it. Sorry, I can't give you a better answer than that. It's you know, I'm like everybody else. What the hell are we going to do? I mean, obviously people have to be thinking about this, but when you've got our political leaders who are, you know, thinking about, whether it's Danielle Smith thinking about Alberta or the other provinces, you know, taking the place of the federal government, doing things that traditionally Canadian provinces do not do. Like I was reading today, you know, Doug Ford says he wants to send the OPP to the border to reassure the Americans. I mean, like, what? You know, I mean, we're just getting into ridiculous territory, and they're acting like American states. So I don't think that's helping us. But then again, when you've got a power vacuum at the top and you've got a vacuum of leadership, complete absence of leadership at the top, what do you expect? So sorry, I can't be more optimistic than that. You know, I'm trying to make my way.
So if I may, do you see the liberal democratic order of, say, the last 75, 80 years as an aberration compared to what has always been then? And Trump is just a continuation of what has always been?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that, but the point being is that historically, and if you look at the Western world, the liberal democratic order, we're in the minority, time-wise and population-wise. Okay, there's a book that came out a couple of years ago by an anthropologist, Joseph Henrich. It's called The Weirdest People in the World. Weird refers to Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. Okay, how many countries fit that bill? Basically, Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand, a couple of other countries, Japan, South Korea, although look what the hell's going on in South Korea right now. Can anybody tell me what's going on? I mean, they're arresting the president, the sitting president. Parts of the population are trying to prevent them from doing that. So I think that the aberration is, peace is the aberration, democracy is the aberration, liberalism is the aberration. If most people had their way, if we look historically and throughout the world, we would have constant war, poverty, and everybody would be at their throat. So call me a Hobbesian, and I think that's basically the state of nature, is war, pestilence, nasty, brutish, and short lives. And we have to work. It's like, you know, you have to work to push a rock up a hill. It's the myth of Sisyphus. the book by Albert Camus, where, you know, like every day you push this rock up the hill, as soon as you stop, it starts rolling back. You know, so I don't know. I don't think it's a pessimistic worldview. I don't think it's my worldview is pessimistic or optimistic. It's just, it's realistic. That's what it is. You know, humans are very imperfect, and we fight, we argue, we're jealous, we're envious, we're resentful, we're angry, we're violent, but we're also loving and kind and friendly, etc. And depending on the circumstances and who you're dealing with, it varies. So that's what I would say.
Well, I was hoping that Thomas Hobbes was wrong, so thank you.
I think he was a good observer of human nature.
So, Fred, thanks for that. And Richard, going back to Hobbes, what do you see as the sort of end state to this Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Is there an end state that doesn't involve either the destruction of Israel or the destruction of the Palestinian people?
I think we'll see more of the same. We'll just keep muddling through. They will keep muddling through on both sides. See, the problem is the Israelis, and I hope this came through, the Israelis are Westerners. You know, I mean, they're liberals in the American sense, generally speaking. And you know, Jews throughout the world, and especially in the States, the majority are what they call liberals. You know, they're pro-democrat, et cetera, et cetera. So they have a sort of like a Rousseauite view of human nature. If we're going to talk about Hobbes and his opposite or his nemesis, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, you know, human nature is basically good. It's corrupted by society, blah, 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 back to nature, et cetera, et cetera. The reality is, if any of us were stuck in the woods we'd all be, you know, we'd be dead in a day and a half. You know, I mean, there was an episode once, many, many years ago of The Simpsons where Homer gets locked out of the house or something, or he has to live in the backyard, and he turns basically into a savage within about 12 hours. He's covered in mud and all kinds of stuff. You know, I mean, it doesn't take long for these atavistic tendencies to come to the fore. You know, back when it first started, that show Survivor, the first couple of seasons, it was interesting to see, you know, when there was a guy, and it was always a guy who managed to be able to fish or hunt. And then all the women would throw themselves around him and, oh, we love you, we want to be your friend. You know, when somebody's providing food, no matter who it is, they're going to want to be their friends. You know, so I think human nature, this aspect of human nature is never very far. So to answer your question, I think we're going to have more of the same. It'll be frustrating. Hamas may be wiped out, but then something else will come along. And the only thing that will solve the problem is a change of heart by the Palestinians. How likely is that? It's completely unlikely. Especially they got so many allies around the world. They've played this so well, and they've exploited, let's be frank, anti-Semitism and Jew hatred. Mm-hmm. Okay, most of this is anti-Semitism, basically. Now, somebody is talking about oversimplifying the Palestinian struggle, but you know, I mean, to me, that's, you know, that's the clear-eyed look at it. Maybe Israel never should have been established. Maybe there never should have been a Balfour Declaration of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Well, you know, that's water under the bridge. Israel isn't going anywhere. The Palestinians aren't going anywhere. So the real solution is a two-state solution. It's not going to happen until the Palestinians give up on wanting to take over Israel and either killing all the Jews or subjugating them or whatever. The basic problem that the Jews have is they don't know their place. Okay, certainly from the Arab standpoint, but from a lot of other peoples, that's what fuels anti-Semitism. They don't want to just go in the corner there, do your own little thing, and don't bother us. They have the gall to be better at us than us at most things. You know, 25% of all science and, you know, physics and chemistry Nobels have been won by Jewish people. You know, Ashkenazi Jews, of course. But so, you know, the reality is they're not going anywhere. They're a powerful nation. They have powerful technology. They got a big brother that's, even when they don't fully support them, like for instance, we've seen under Biden, they still have that support. They got a huge base in the United States of support and in other Western countries, even though there is a lot of people who are against them and claim that anti-Zionism isn't anti-Semitism. But I see them as basically equal. So as long as that exists, I think the conflict is going to continue. I'd like to say, you know, there's a solution and, you know, they can have a change of heart and all we have to do is convince them. Oh, why didn't we think of convincing them otherwise? You know, it's not going to happen. Sorry.
Oh yeah, if only somebody had thought of that solution. So with regard to the frozen conflict kind of Cyprus style thing, I'm going to talk to, I'm going to pitch to Karen right now to ask her question. And then Aisha Mehdi, I'll let you have a chance at it after that.
Thanks, Quentin. Yeah, great presentation, Richard. I, having just been in Cyprus and seeing the buffer zone and the tension that still exists in the buffer zone, 6 decades of peacekeeping, billions and billions of UN dollars to keep two kind of angry local people apart for 60 years, that they still hate each other. You know, there's some development on a grassroots level with you know, Greek Cypriot and Turk Cypriot communities that, you know, want to get along, but on a political level, there's no progress whatsoever. And in fact, I think it's more volatile than ever. And so, what do you do as a Western world when you look at warring nations and you want to help people out? You know, just across the sea is Israel and Palestine. And, you know, do you let them duke it out and may the best man win? Or do you spend billions and billions and billions of dollars and decades of peacekeeping resources, which come at a risk as well, and for not really much effect, except that, you know, the Greeks and the Turks in Cyprus have been able to live relatively peacefully. But one thing I've seen is that drawing a line and creating a buffer zone doesn't necessarily create peace and goodwill in the next generation. They're raised to think of their situation as us versus them. And so I'm just kind of musing, you know, what do you do as a Western world that wants to do the right thing and be, you know, kind of global humanitarians? Do we take the hands-off approach and let everybody duke it out, or do we invest those dollars?
Well, you're asking me to be prescriptive.
Yeah, I'm interested in anybody's opinions on.
You know, I'm not an expert on Cyprus. I'm not an expert on Israel-Palestine, but I know people who are. And I don't know, maybe Sean would have some words to say about that. But what I can say is, where did peacekeeping come from? It came from the need to contain local or regional wars so that they wouldn't escalate into global thermonuclear war. And also it was part of the decolonization and to keep the Soviets out of Africa, to keep them out of war zones, et cetera, because let's be frank, communism thrives on war. That's how it grows. So basically, I would say that once that disappeared, the Cold War, sort of like most of the logic of peacekeeping disappeared. Why would we have peacekeeping? And you just have to look at different countries. Like, I know that there were feeble attempts to intervene in Congo and stuff like that, but they're still fighting. I mean, they had a massive war, millions of people got killed. Okay. Does anybody know what the heck's going on in Somalia and Sudan right now? I mean, they're fighting and killing each other, but they're not strategic. They're not, you know, they're not on main shipping routes. Okay, so that's one of the things about the Houthis. They occupy a very strategic choke point, you know. So I don't know. I don't know what the solution is, but I think the beginning is at least to have a lucid view of the situation. And, you know, I used to think, you know, eventually they'll come to their reason and they'll, you know, they'll settle down and be peaceful. You know, after the Second World War, what was the solution? Ethnic cleansing. You know, they moved 10 million Germans out of Eastern Europe or more. Poles were exchanged for Czechs, and Czechs were exchanged for Slovakians and Hungarians and Romanians and Ukrainians, and until they had more or less homogeneous populations. And then they said, okay, now we don't want to fight anymore. But how much, you know, what was the disruption of that? I mean, there's a whole book on that by, I forget the guy's name, but it's called Savage Continent, where he goes into all how the Second World War didn't end in Eastern Europe for about 5 or 10 years in some cases. You know, Poles were still killing Jews in 1946 and 1947 on pogroms. You know, I mean, so part of that, you know, it would be nice to say we could all live together and, you know, Rodney King, why can't we all just get along? Well, because we're idiots. You know, we're human beings, and, you know, we can't stand to see those people over there praying to that God, or not doing what we're doing, or speaking a different language. And, you know, we even have it in Canada to a certain extent. So I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. I'd like to say, you know, I've got the magic recipe, but I think the starting point, and I think it's very interesting that you say, you know, the situation there, you know, I wonder what's going on in Bosnia, in Kosovo. I was in Bosnia in 1999, 2000. I mean, do they love each other? It's probably better that they're separated and they have their own states and they can mismanage that on their own side. I don't know. Does anybody else have any insights on Cyprus? Because I don't.
You know, I've just been kind of interested in thinking about it. What is it? What are the traits and values that we possess, which I think is kind of, you know, bringing it full circle back to the title of your talk.
Right.
What is it about people that wants to hate each other and kill each other versus people that are willing to work it out? You know, it's tempting to say that maybe there's a common denominator in religious values, but no, because you can tear that apart pretty quickly. Or, you know, is it economics? You know, it'd be interesting to kind of to narrow that down to see what is it about our culture that sort of gives us the skills and the tools to want to get along and be collaborative and work together despite our differences. Maybe it's education.
I don't know. The Palestinians are the most educated people in the Arab world. You know,
Yeah, so you can tear that apart pretty quickly too.
Yeah, but I mean, the point is that like, take religious tolerance. What is religious tolerance? It comes from the concept, like in engineering, when you talk about tolerances, you know, you can allow a certain amount of movement. We're not saying you have to agree with the other religion. We just have to say we agree to disagree and not talk about it. You know, it's like the old thing my father always used to say, never talk about sex, religion, or politics. And then he would start talking about sex, religion, or politics. But the point being that if you want religious tolerance, or toleration, as I think it was Locke called it, on religious toleration, was, you know, let people worship their God in the way they want, as long as they're not trying to get everybody else to worship in their way. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's the basic thing. But when you start talking about livelihood, about you have to have vaccinations, you have to do this, you have to go there, you can't go there, you can't do that, you can't start a business of that kind, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where I think people get really, really riled up, is, you know, if you threaten them personally, if you threaten their livelihood, their prestige, their status, their how they want to worship, what they think is important to them, that's where you get conflict. Why do we have conflict at the political level in Canada now? Because we got half the country is trying to impose a way of seeing the world on the other half of the country that the other half of the country doesn't want. Let us live our lives. That's what causes conflict. When you try to tell other people what to do and how to do it, people get pissed off. And why did why do authoritarian regimes exist? Because people resist. So they scare the shit out of them. Sorry, from they kill them, they torture them, they punish them until they submit. That's that's my view. If we were angels, we wouldn't need what was that? Is that the quote by Abraham Lincoln? If men were angels, we wouldn't have wars, or something like that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, great segue into Abraham Lincoln. Really enjoyed that piece, because one of the questions, and I'll push back on this, Richard, you're saying that this is human nature and that it's always going to be with us. And you say that some of this is a result of differing and conflicting worldviews. But where do those worldviews come from? And what is the role of the leadership in promoting, promulgating, developing, nurturing those worldviews?
Well, I think that the problem isn't so much in that. Like, Trudeau has promulgated a worldview. Jagmeet Singh promulgates a worldview. I don't agree with it, but and so does Pierre Poilievre. And you can see like how some of the people now are reacting to Poilievre. They don't like Poilievre. They don't like the Conservatives. They're comparing him to Trump or whatever. People have their point of view. We have to agree that, okay, we have an election every 4 years. We vote in a government. We play by the rules. We accept the rules. Then maybe they get voted out, and then another team comes in and gets to do what they want. And maybe we support them for a while, or we support them on most of what they want to do, and other things we don't. And then they get voted out, and then we get pissed off at the next government that comes in. The point here is you have to have a basic, you have to agree to play by the rules. When you stop agreeing to play by the rules, that's where you run into problems. Why are the rules there? Because people infringe on the rules. They go too far. They try to you give them we say in French, anyway, you give them an inch and they take a mile. It's always going to be that way. That's human nature. Now, the reason why we have these rules, these laws, etc., is that we're trying to live together. That's the main problem. And there's a quote at one point. Jordan Peterson said, humans are extremely docile. I mean, we can sit in an airplane, 300 people in an airplane, crushed in there like sardines, and we're not killing each other. He says, put a bunch of chimpanzees in an airplane and it'll be pandemonium after about 10 seconds. They'll be at each other's throat and killing each other. Okay, so there's humans are self-domesticated to a certain extent, but the self-domestication is within the in-group. Okay, so what we have to do is have these rules, these baseline rules, that you respect individual rights. That's why we have private property. Within your private property, you can do what you want. Between consenting adults. Where people get riled up is where it's not between consenting adults, or when there is overreach. People try to infringe on your rights, on your property rights or your personal rights, and that takes restraint. But it also takes law and order. It takes law enforcement. You have to protect the borders, and like the federal government's job, the main job of the federal government is law and order, protect the borders, and defense. And what do? They want a dental program, which is a provincial responsibility. So a lot of our conflicts in Canada come from the federal government infringing on provincial responsibilities. Okay, so if they did what they were supposed to do, which is national defense, border security, law enforcement, law and order, etc., all these things, which are the basics, the minimums, interprovincial commerce, international commerce, international relations. If they stuck to that, there would be a lot less problems. But no, they want to do what the provinces are supposed to be doing. And it's the same thing in all the federal countries. The federal governments always infringe on the provinces or the states, whatever it is. So you have to have these ground rules. The rules exist for a reason. And we're lucky because our rules are codified. At a certain point, there was something called natural law, which was, part of the role of judges was, they would go to see the wise people, the old people, the elders, could be men, women, primarily men, but also in some cultures, women also. What is the law? Part of the role of the judges was to figure out what the heck is our law, and it was based on custom and practice and tradition. And then they say, okay, yeah, it's not right to murder somebody. Okay, let's collectively deal with murderers or thieves instead of getting a vendetta going between two clans or two families or two tribes. Okay, so they said, this is what we're trying to achieve so that we have peace, because everybody knows when you have peace, then you can have prosperity. But in order to have peace, you need to have security. So peace, security, prosperity, they go together. So when a federal government is doing everything except what it's supposed to be doing, that pisses people off to the point where they say, okay, get this government out. Now we're going to elect a law and order government. And, they're going to be tough on crime or whatever. And how long does that last? So, but I think the basic model is religious toleration. And after 150 years of killing each other, the Europeans said, maybe we should just let people worship however they want. Okay. And even then, there were still riots between Protestants and Catholics in Buckingham, Quebec in 1900, and they'd have to call out the militia. Like I once did this study when I was doing staff school in Toronto on aid to the civil power. And during the first 50 years of Confederation, that was the main role of the militia, was riot police. They would call out the militia because there'd be an Orange Day parade and it'd turn into a riot and street battles between Protestants and Catholics. So, it's, you got to have these basic rules, and that's, but where do the rules come from? They come from the worldview, so.
And it goes back to Aristotle's notion that societies are conglomerations of interests, and that what a democracy does is it allows us to balance off those interests by allowing one interest to prevail. And then they get their 4 years at the helm or 8 years at the helm, and then the other interest group prevails. So I take your point that democracy only works if everybody plays by the rules. And I think some of this is what we're seeing playing out in the States right now. Okay.
And I think this is what is annoying, just if I may, certainly me, what's annoying a lot of people right now is the games that are being played with prorogation and everything. And it's not that people are against prorogation. It's just it's so transparent what's being done is in order to allow the Liberals to have a leadership race, okay, to replace Trudeau. And whether you support Trudeau or not, but I'm hearing from a lot of Liberals and I'm reading a lot of Liberals and things like that who are saying, even Chrétien was saying, the other day on, I think it was on CTV or on Global, he says, Trudeau waited too long to resign. Well, what did Chrétien do? He wasn't any better when he was in that position, and all his feuds with Paul Martin and everything like that. So the point being is that that's what annoys people, is when you start gaming the rules for your own purposes, and that annoys people. Certainly annoys me. And if we have an election and the Liberals are voted in again, I'm going to be pissed off, but I'm going to say, well, it was an election, and that was one of the, when Stephen Harper lost the election in 2015, he said the people have spoken, and he resigned as leader and went on and did something else.
Mhm.
So that's what we're supposed to do. But we're a lot of people are sore losers. So I don't know if there are any other questions of substance on worldviews, and so I think you could call me perhaps an interested or a deep thinking amateur or something like that. But I think as strategists, as professionals, some of us are retired, some of us are still in the workforce, some of us are educators. I think it's important that we have this point of view so that we can be, basically what it boils down to is try to walk a mile in the other person's shoes. What are they seeing? Now, we might not agree with it, but that's basically the concept of understanding, like verstehen, which is getting inside the other person's mindset and seeing it from their point of view. And a lot of us are ex-military, when we used to do these terrain walks, or we do these toots, or tactical exercises without troops, we'd go and do a battlefield tour, and you're looking at the situation. Okay, you're here, you're the leader, you're the company commander, the battalion commander. Here's what he was facing. Here's what he knew at that point in time. How would you have acted? And you realize half the time that you would have done exactly the same thing if you had that person's information at that point in time. So that's understanding. That's getting inside the other mindset. And I think that's really what I'm getting at, is trying to understand the mindset, where they're coming from, what their objectives are. And from there, we can start having a more realistic point of view. So from the to close out on Israel-Palestine, I think ultimately, if there's to be peace, there has to be, the Palestinians have to give up the hope of taking over Israel. And it's ridiculous. It's not even like, okay, we'll have a population exchange or land. No, you've got fourth generation descendants who say they want to be able to return to their great grandfather's home in Jaffa or Haifa. That exists nowhere else. There isn't even a legal framework for that. We can't even imagine how you would make that work. And now that there are millions more that are considered Palestinians, how do you make that work? It's completely unrealistic. The reality of the goal isn't that. It's to get rid of the Jews. That's what the reality of the goal is. And if they can achieve that, do you think the powers that be in the Middle East and in the Palestinians or whatever, the Arab countries, do you think they care what happens to ordinary Palestinians? So that's my thinking on that. Israel, the most realistic thing for Israel is to destroy Hamas, Hezbollah, whatever else. There's such a bunch in Syria, HTI or whatever, the Al-Jolani, whatever his name is, this week, is to keep them at bay and to keep hoping and working for a change of heart and trying to get the rest of the international community. And if every day that Israel continues to exist is a day it's won, it's a success, in my mind. Whether we agree with the fact that whether it should have existed in the first place or not is irrelevant. Same with us. We're here in Canada. We settled. That's why I reject this whole concept of settler colonialism, and we're colonials and we're settlers, and there's indigenous people. Indigenous, what does it mean? It means if you mean native to the land, you were born here, that's one thing, but that's not what they mean. They mean, and in Greek, it's even better. It's autochthonous, which means having sprung out of the earth. Well, nobody sprung out of the earth, okay? We don't belong to the land, and that is a very primitive mentality, and that's where we have to get away from. So that's my thinking on that. I don't know. Are there other questions or comments?
I'll toss it out to the group. Any other questions or comments?
I'd like to end on a much happier note, but okay. Well, I guess that's it then. Thank you very much. If I can get, well, there'll be a recording of this, but if I could get like the download of all the comments, I really find those interesting, and I'll take them as feedback on my presentation and my ideas. And if anybody wants to engage in discussion on these issues with me, feel free to do so. I think you mentioned my website, exploitingchange.com. And my email, richard.martin@alcera.ca, ALCERA.ca. just drop me a line. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. Thank you, Angela. She'll send me the chat transcript, and I'll take that as very valuable feedback. And I'm continuing to work on this. And I want to extend it also outside of just conflict into competitive settings like business and also cooperative. Because I think it's important in cooperation, if we want to work together, it's important to understand what it is that you want, what I want. And I think that's part of what we're trying to get at with this Trump thing, is what does he want? Okay. And it's coming behind there might be something concrete behind that. There probably is, but it's behind a wall of obfuscation and ridiculous pronouncements such that we don't know what the hell's being said. And I think it was Q, you said this where you said that, I forget, I'm getting tired here, but you said something about Trump. Anyway, I'm getting too tired.
Trump, the chaos agent, or Trump is a grifter?
No, it wasn't that. It was something else that you were saying that, oh yeah, if he does this to his friends, what's he going to do to his enemies? And I thought, I hadn't thought of that, but that's really good. That's something to think about. So thank you very much.
All right. One other comment in there. Ty, did you want to expand on your comment or no? Yep.
Okay, somebody says my comments on Indigenous Canadians is dead wrong, ill-informed. Okay, well, maybe, but you would have to tell me why. But maybe we could have a conversation one-to-one on that.
Sure thing.
Okay.
By the way, I'm not against Indigenous Canadians. What I'm against is the superficiality of the concept of indigeneity, which, in my estimation, is it's like these terms we throw around: escalation, proxies, indigenous. What do they really mean? And this is part of the strategic epistemology.
I'll be happy to explain to you exactly what it means, sir.
Well, why are you getting angry at me?
I'm not angry with you at all.
No, but you're being aggressive there, sir. Calm down. We're having a discussion. I'm allowed to have an opinion. You're allowed to have an opinion. So get off your high horses, okay?
Later, bud.
You need to put up with that. Okay. Any other questions?
And neither do I.
Okay, we're not going to get into a debate here. Ty, you have the floor if you want to say something. If you want to do it in a respectful manner, that's great. If you don't. Okay, Richard. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up there. Richard, thank you very much for that presentation. Obviously provocative.
Yeah.
Makes people think, and sometimes we need to do that. So thank you very much for that. Karen, I'll back to you for any closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard. That was really thought-provoking. Really enjoyed it, and thank you everybody for coming out tonight. Our next presentation is in person in Calgary. If you happen to be in Calgary on February the 3rd, the Monday evening at 7 p.m. at the Military Museums, Lieutenant General Michel Maisonneuve will be speaking about the leadership crisis in Canada. Bound to be an interesting discussion as well. So we encourage you to come out. The admission is free, and we hope to see you there. And we'll be back again on Zoom in the month of February. So please do subscribe to our newsletters and take out a membership for Rousey so that you can stay informed on our upcoming presentations. We appreciate your discussion and your involvement. So thanks so much. Good night, everybody.